So, in the last issue, we left the main plot in an actually pretty interesting situation. A new locale with a group of interesting characters who we weren't particularly sure on whether their motives were good or not, with a mystery to consider as to what was causing the Robians of this region to continue acting like aggressive, mindless killing machines. That's a pretty good setup, as I pointed out last time. It got me interested, it got me invested, and I'm legitimately looking forward to seeing what else this story has in store. But then reality kicks in, and I remember that I'm reading old Sonic Archie Comics, where quality is a roller coaster, and no matter how promising the start of a story might be, there is always a good chance it will nosedive at any given point. At this point in time, I do feel the need to reiterate the fact that I do love this series, but going back and reading over it with a more critical eye as an adult does tend to make the flaws and faults in its writing much more obvious, and not just the general faults that you would find in something aimed at kids, because there's a lot of quality kids media out there, even more so nowadays, I personally think. But writing during early and mid Archie Sonic is often just plain bad. But I'm hoping that, in this instance, we have something that defies my expectations, especially so soon after dealing with the end of the Chaotix arc back in the Knuckles book that, barely focused on or featured the Chaotix. The cover here is simple, but I do feel it's pretty good in the context of the story it's presenting, showing us a pure white background with the statue of Sonic located in Sandblast City that we were shown in the previous issue, with the real Sonic looking bored and annoyed at its feet. We even get a bit of a pun from him down there. It's a cover that is simple but effective, and I admit I'm a fan of the stone texture used for the statue here. It honestly looks quite good. We open the second chapter of the story, Icon, not following up with Sonic and Tails, but with the Devil's Gulag prison, where the narration's really trying to sell us on just how impossible escape is from it, as even if a prisoner got out of their cell, the Gulag is up on top of a sheer pillar, up among the clouds, and the water down at the bottom is volcanically heated, meaning someone would probably boil to death as soon as they dropped into it. Of course, prisons like this in fiction exist to be broken out of, and we already started a prison riot in the last issue, which the big 2-page spread exists to show us. It's basically just reminding us of what the state of things was during the last issue, with Snively watching in nervous awe as the other escapees completely tear the place apart, thinking to himself that when he said he was planning a breakout, he wasn't planning it to be so soon. Cut back to Sandblast City, where Sonic and Tails are being given the celebrity treatment, which Sonic seems to be more than happy to take advantage of, being massaged and fed chili dogs by 2 attractive women, while Tails can't seem to sit still. While Sonic seems pretty happy to just put everything on hold and be treated like royalty, Tails is pretty uncomfortable with the situation, giving us a quick flashback to the events of the past issue, reminding everyone that Sonic is seen as some sort of legendary figure here, and Sonic was very happy to put their quest to stop the evil sorcerer on hold for a few weeks. Sonic gets Tails' attention, and they send the ladies out of the room while the two of them argue about whether they should stay or leave, Tails still having a bit of a weird feeling about the whole place. The women, listening outside the door, along with Jack, who just happens by, states that their plan is working perfectly, that Sonic and Tails won't be leaving this place anytime soon, as they plan to keep them here in Sandblast for the rest of their lives. Another cut to the Devil's Gulag, where it seems like the fighting is finally finished and Snively is attempting to sneak away before he gets spotted by the other prisoners, but it isn't long before they spot him, surround him, and officially make him their new leader, since they're all still under the impression that it was him who managed to get their cell doors open. Snively goes along with it, of course. He's not about to let a bunch of violent thugs know that he had absolutely nothing to do with getting them out. Cutting back to Sandblast, it's now nighttime, and Tails is woken up by Sonic, who explains that he knew that something was up, and so he pretended to be fine with staying to make sure that the Sandblasters wouldn't think he was onto them. A fairly good strategy, admittedly, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to have worked out how he wanted it to, as they are immediately stopped by Jack and a few of his flunkies as soon as they step out of their room. Of course, Sonic is Sonic, so he and Tails just take off running before anyone can grab them, and Sonic tells Tails to go and get the biplane started, while he goes off to find a way to deactivate the force field around the city, since they wouldn't exactly get far trying to fly the plane through it. Tails manages to get to the plane without much of a problem, easily dispatching his own pursuers by just dropping a giant tarp on top of them. Sonic, meanwhile, zooms all over the city looking for anything that might be controls for the force field before having a small flash of brilliance. If they were going to hide the controls for the force field anywhere, it would probably be in the most important place in town, which Jack had pointed out was the huge statue of Sonic sitting at the center of town. As much as he doesn't want to do it, Sonic spin dashes straight at his stone visage, much to Jack's horror, shattering it. And just like that, the barrier starts to dissipate. Jack, of course, is not particularly happy about this, going from an obsessed fan to a vengeance-filled fighter immediately, but before he can make good on his threats against Sonic, a laser blast heralds the arrival of the massive army of mindless Robians. Sonic takes off as Jack swears vengeance against him, with Tails flying over the city, which is rapidly devolving into a war zone. He swoops down to pick Sonic up just as he's being surrounded by a large group of both pissed-off Sandblasters and hostile robots. Sonic and Tails fly away from the fallen city before looking back at it, Sonic lamenting that they did legitimately like him, even if their hero worship was a bit on the dangerous side. Tails even suggests that they could go back and... do what, Tails? They're kind of preoccupied at the moment, and even if they weren't, I don't think they'd be in the mood to talk. Sonic, however, just tells him to fly the plane. And we get one final panel showing Snively and his new entourage, as well as several other escape pods leaving the exploding gulag behind, with him declaring that they're heading back to Robotropolis. I like this. For the most part. This is definitely a much more action-heavy issue than the first one, and I do wish they had elaborated on Jack's motivation a bit more. I do believe that his hero worship of Sonic is legitimate, so I guess it was for morale purposes, or maybe they were hoping to use Sonic as basically a living weapon against the Robians attacking them, but it's not really given a huge amount of time, and him acting so insistent and sinister with Sonic feels a bit weird. I would have expected him to be a bit more manipulative towards Sonic rather than just jumping to try and keep him as an unwilling prisoner. With that in mind, I don't think it's too out of character for Sonic to basically abandon them to their fate after taking out what was essentially their only means of keeping themselves safe from the onslaught of tireless robots. I waffled back and forth on whether or not Sonic's actions here were out of character, especially considering that we aren't shown if the city contained non-combatants or if all of them were basically part of a militia. I mean, we had those two women early on, but considering that they seemed pretty close to Jack, it's fairly fair to assume they were at least combat trained, and everyone else that we saw was definitely ready for a fight. So I don't think it's too far off to assume that everyone who was in Sandblast City was a part of the standing army there. But what I really love about this storyline is that it wraps up the immediate plot thread, but the dangling plot threads are left behind, and they aren't anything that we need to worry about right away. It's not something that's being added onto the pile of ongoing threads, along with the hunt for Naugus, Sally's strained relationship with her father, Jeffrey's secret service group, and the Brotherhood's secret plan for Knuckles. Instead, the unanswered questions about why the Robians are still mindless murder machines and the consequences of Sonic's actions are plot points that can be returned to later. We're no longer concerned with this area because none of our principal characters are there anymore. It takes a back seat to the other big plot threads that we already have ongoing, and the writers can return to this place at a later date if they so choose, to answer questions and show what Sonic's actions resulted in. The same can be said for Snively and the other breakouts from the Devil's Gulag. While it is somewhat immediate considering they're heading towards Mobotropolis, it isn't like they're going to be some sort of grand overarching plot, a subplot at most, so they aren't really something that I feel needs to be put on the pile with everything else, because all things considered, Snively and his entourage are among the more minor threats we're dealing with in the overarching story. Also, I have to point out that I do like how the Devil's Gulag stuff was handled, both here and in the previous issue. Unlike, say, all the excess plot lines thrown into the chaotic storyline back in the Knuckles book, usually only a single page, and they didn't linger for too long, just long enough to keep the audience informed of what was happening, and that was it. And I feel like they were logically dispersed in places that didn't really interrupt the flow of the main storyline. The one hiccup is that the first page on the jailbreak storyline in this issue is basically just a recap of what was happening from the last one. But given that this was originally released monthly, that does make a bit more sense. Then again, I suppose people could have always gone back and reread the previous issue that they had, but still, the art is pretty good for this issue. Like I mentioned before, there is a lot more action this time compared to the last issue, and for the most part, it's pretty well represented. There are a few points where I do think there's a bit too much jumping about from panel to panel, but it's kept to a minimum here, and I really like how, as things start to go to hell near the end of the story, the panels themselves actually feel like they're getting more chaotic, with more detail in the backgrounds and more to keep track of. It might be a coincidence, but I like the effect. So good on you, art team, that being Stephen Butler on pencils, Pam Eklund on inks, and Ken Penders on colors. My god. Well, credit where credit is due, Ken's coloring is often what I feel is his best skill as an artist, and here, while it's a bit simpler compared to other colorists, it is fairly well done. I don't have any major complaints. And good on you, Carl Ballers, you wrote a pretty good storyline that actually wrapped up nicely and doesn't require me to keep information in my brain, but still gives us something that we can return to down the line if we so wish. It's not an amazing story, but I think it's a good one. Definitely a nice read. So I guess that means we have to see if the attitude continues in the backup story continuing the St. John and Sally storyline. We open on Sally going to St. John's office to speak with him, but is informed that he's not there. And when she tries to see for herself, she's barred entry, stating that she isn't authorized to go beyond that point, which definitely doesn't sit well with her. She asks where to find him so that she can talk to him directly about this, before we cut to St. John and the rest of his team dodging lasers out in the park. Stu notes that this was just supposed to be an obstacle course, but Jeffrey tells them that, as far as they're concerned, this is the real deal. Good to know he's still fine with putting his team in danger, I suppose. Heavy uses his hacking skills and his status as a former badnik to get them inside of a warehouse and trick the security system into ignoring him, while Valdez disables the power entirely. While scoping out further, the team comes across a roaming SWAT bot and knocks it out by bashing it in the back of the head, taking it back with them to base, rolling it out on a cart. And as they're leaving the warehouse, quarry in tow, who should they run into but Sally Acorn, who is rightfully pissed at all the secrets being kept from her and demands that Jeffrey give her some answers, as she is his superior officer. But unfortunately, Jeffrey states that he's taking orders directly from the king, aka her superior officer, and if she wants answers about anything, she'll have to take it up with him, before starting to walk off with the rest of his team, who don't even acknowledge Sally, nor does she acknowledge them, which I find pretty strange. Sally thinks to herself that she'll definitely be taking this up with her father because, you know, he's been so forthcoming with information thus far, with the caption telling us to get ready for some serious fireworks next time. I sure hope so, because this wasn't terribly interesting. While it does at least bring us back around to Sally, it really feels like she's just been waffling and doing nothing since her conversation with her father at the source of all, which, given how shocking and upsetting that conversation was, I can understand her hesitancy, but I'm not really sure what she's been up to before going to talk to Jeffrey. The primary point of this issue is to try and show us that the team's been training and is starting to mesh well as a unit, only it doesn't do that. Both Stu and Hershey still haven't gotten to do anything in this storyline so far. I don't get why they're here, and even Baum takes a back seat here to allowing Heavy and Valdez to handle everything during the mission. So basically, they're really the only important members of the team so far. I mean, at least Baum has some utility when it's called for, but again, Hershey and Stu have done nothing of note during 3 backup stories when this team got started. Again, the art is nice, but I kind of feel like this particular story was just filler. And I get what it was supposed to do, but it sort of fails at it because it doesn't really show the team acting as a unit, instead just putting emphasis on a few specific members who have already been getting some fairly special treatment thus far in the arc, with the only thing of note being the clash between Sally and Jeffrey, and that was barely given any sort of screen time. Maybe they'll wrap things up in the next issue perchance? One can only hope as we get back into the hunt for Ixis Naugus in issue 64. I'll see you next time, everyone.